with Dr. Joan Marsh, who is the editor-in-chief of Lancet Psychiatry, and will give us some pieces of advice on how to publish in higher-ranking journals. Before we start, let me give you some pieces of information. First, as you just noticed, the meeting is recorded. And second, if you have any problems, technical problems to access to here or whatever with the webinar, you can just contact Jeremiah Schenk. You see his email address on the chat. He is here to help you, and he's the person to ask. If you have questions, you can use the question and answer button that is on the bottom of your screen. So Claudie, hi, I see you, welcome. And we will see your question. You cannot speak, we cannot see you, but you can write your question using, probably it is on the 3 dots on the right button of your screen, and that's the Q&A button that allows you to ask for questions. I will moderate the discussion, so maybe we won't have time to answer all questions. Maybe yes, I hope so. But in case it is not, so we don't have enough time, then I will pick some major questions that it might be interesting for all. Before we start, I'd like to welcome you in the name of EACLIPT, the European Association for Clinical Psychology and Psychological Treatment. Sorry, we are at the end. And we are hosting this webinar. So we are a pan-European organization with more than 100 members from all over the field. And this is a fully member-funded organization. We like to try to foster evidence-based clinical psychology in Europe and provide a platform to strengthen mental health research. We do host conferences, webinars, and also lobby for mental health research at the European level. And we also have a peer-reviewed journal, Clinical Psychology in Europe, that just has been indexed for impact factor. So that's our board, and we have our conference in Frankfurt on May 28 to 30 in Germany. If you are interested, you can also directly click there and register for the conference if you're interested. And of course, we live for our member and we live from our members. So if you are, or if you identify as a clinical psychologist or psychologist interested in psychological treatment or clinical psychology, just don't hesitate to join us. You see here all the benefits. I just don't want to take so much time from the very important time with Joan Marsh, but there is education material, there is access to webinars, we have the conferences, there is the opportunity to have information on jobs opening, on research projects, and so we will be very welcome. We will be glad to welcome you as a member. So if you are interested, you can just use this QR code. And as you see, the price is very affordable with €25 because we want to be accessible and open for everybody. So just don't hesitate. And now I will stop sharing. And and come back to you. And as the host of this event, I also have the pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Joan Marsh, who is the editor-in-chief of the Lancet Psychiatry. She joined the Lancet Group in November 2013 as deputy editor to help to launch the Lancet Psychiatry and continued in that role until November 2021. She now has overall responsibility for the journal and its development, which includes manuscript assessment, overseeing peer review, and commissioning content. Her particular project is the Editorial Board Development Program that aims to train early career researchers from low-middle income countries in peer review and manuscript evaluation in preparation for joining a journal's editorial board. So Joan read natural sciences at Cambridge University, then completed a PhD in molecular biology. She worked as an editor with the Cyber Novartis Foundation in London, editing and organizing their prestigious symposium series. Joan spent several years in Southeast Asia, including 2 years in Hong Kong, where she worked for Hong Kong University and for Accepta Medica. Joan returned to the UK in September 1999 and became an editor with John Wiley and Sons, commissioning books in the life sciences and medicine. She's actively engaged with the European Association of Science Editors. She was on the council for 12 years, including 6 as president. She's now chair of its Gender Policy Committee, with a particular interest in improving diversity in peer review. She's also an associate editor for the association's journal, European Association Editing. So this is quite a program and quite a lot of achievement, and we are very honored to have you on board with us this evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chantal, for a lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for coming. So I'm going to share my screen. Particular welcome to Cloudy. Lovely to see you. Cloudy, you've heard most of this before, but I have a couple of new things to say. So even those of you who heard me, there's a few little things in here. So what I'm going to do is talk about how we work at the Lancet Group in general and Lancet Psychiatry in particular. This is the only journal I've ever worked on in detail, so it's very much this is what I know. Much of it will apply to other high impact journals or other journals in general, but some of it will not. So I just need to find my page down button. Oh, come here. Okay, try again. There we go. So the Lancet itself was founded in 1823 by a surgeon called Thomas Wackley, who wrote, "A lancet can be an arched window to let in the light, or it can be a sharp surgical instrument to cut out the dross." That's the bad stuff. And I intend to use it in both senses. And that's what we aim to do at the Lancet journals. We want to shine light on good practice, good research, and we want to help cut out the less good research. So when we're assessing papers, what are we looking for? And our mission is to change clinical practice. So we're looking for research that will change clinical practice or inform future research. And in psychiatry, there's a lot more of informing future research than changing clinical practice. We're looking for first, so the novelty, but also the last. So that's the definitive study on something. And again, in psychiatry, it's quite rare. There are not many studies that say this intervention should be used or this intervention should not be used. Generally, it's, well, this one appears to be better than another one, but it's got weaknesses and we've got caveats. So first and last is an ambition, but I think in psychiatry, we're much more just looking to build on what's gone before. But we do want papers that are of interest to a wide audience. We're an international journal. The studies should be ethically sound. They should have robust methodology so that you can trust that as far as we can tell from the work that's been done, the findings are valid, and it should be fully reported. And I'll come back to this. So research that's going to change clinical practice, this might be an improved treatment. So it would be more effective, it might work faster, last longer, could be cheaper, could be simpler, or it might be effective in a different population to previous evidence. So it might be in a different age group or a different country or a different disorder even, or a disorder with different comorbidities. And then research that's going to inform future research, these tend to be actually papers, opinion piece papers, so reviews or personal views or health policy papers. And here's an example of one we published last year that was establishing a research agenda for the study and assessment of opioid withdrawal. So where people have an idea of this is what is needed to move research in this area forwards and to make it better and stronger. And another example that I often show is our Psychological Therapies Research Commission that we published several years ago, but I hope you're all familiar with it, was led by Emily Holmes. And that really outlined what needed to be done to improve research in psychological sciences. So I'm going to frame this talk around improving your chances of having your paper accepted. So I'm going to assume that your research ticks all those boxes: ethically sound, robust methodology, because I can't do anything about that if that's not the case. But assuming you've got a good research piece, and that is the first point on here, which is to ask an interesting question. Now, everybody hopefully finds their own research interesting, but some is more interesting than others. It doesn't mean that if your research is me too, you're confirming something, you're validating something, that research generally needs to be done, but it won't necessarily be published in one of the top journals. It might be in a more specialist journal, a regional journal. So to get into the really top journals, you've got to sit right back at the beginning and go, what are the challenging questions in my field, and can I address one of them? And then from there, you go to choose a suitable journal. And there are several things to consider in this. So again, the first one is your target audience. Who are you talking to? Are you talking to people in your country, people who specialize in a particular disorder, people who specialize in a certain type of approach to patients? The standard of the journal. So as I said, are you aiming for the top, for the middle, a bit lower down? And it will depend on different papers, different studies, stage of your career. Then there's items such as the speed of publication. So journals don't always give this information. You can have a look. If some journals will publish dates at the top of a paper, which will show often the date the paper was submitted, possibly when it was accepted, and then you know the publication date. Lancet journals don't do this, but we do work fast. So Lancet journals in general should assess your paper quickly and process it quickly. Some journals take longer, and if it's important that your work is published promptly or by a particular deadline, you do need to take that into consideration. And then there's other items such as the length of article allowed. So Lancet journals are quite short. And if you need a lot of words and you've got a very long piece because you want to tell the full story, it may not be suitable for a Lancet journal. And then there's the business model, which will be dictated by your funder, of whether you need to publish in an open access journal or you can publish in a hybrid journal such as Lancet Psychiatry, where we still have a lot of content behind a paywall and it's accessible by subscription through university libraries. And then going back to other points about improving your chance of having your paper accepted, write a good cover letter. I've lost track of my slides. In online submission systems, there is a box for a cover letter, and I would encourage you to talk to the editor. That's your chance to say to the editor how you think the work fits into the journal. And then tell the full story and show an advance on previous work, and I'll come back to those. So in terms of the full story, you're doing research, it's part of a big project. It might be a 3-year postdoc or a PhD, part of the lab program, a 5-year grant. The top journals will expect the full story and the main story from that research project. So I'm going to talk quite a bit in terms of clinical trials. If you're not working on clinical trials, don't worry, because the points are valid. So take my points and apply them to your own research. But it's easiest to structure for me around clinical trials. But any sort of interventional studies, even epidemiological studies, they can fit into this type of framework. So at the Lancet journals, we're looking for one paper that tells the main story from your research, which will be all pre-specified primary and secondary outcomes, unless the protocol states that some will be published separately. But we're clinical journals, so we would definitely want all your clinical secondary outcomes. So sometimes people say, oh, we're going to publish this in separate papers. And you think you can, but then you will reduce the chances that your primary paper gets into a good journal, because we want the readers to be able to see everything from the study in one place, all gone through the same peer review process, and you can trust it as much as possible being in a high quality journal. So papers that might be subsidiary papers that would complement the main one could be long-term follow-up, could be economic analysis, quality of life analysis, perhaps some qualitative research that goes along with your main story, and then non-clinical outcomes. So you might have imaging results, genetic results. Those would all be in, they could go in the main paper, or they could go in subsidiary papers. So we do publish qualitative research. We don't publish a lot. One problem is that qualitative research, it includes a lot of quotes. So you will actually need longer word count, but then you don't have the big tables and figures that you will get in a quantitative paper. So we actually will allow more words for qualitative papers because we don't edit the quotes. So the quotes will, from your participants, will be reproduced in the paper, and they'll count to the word count, but because we're not editing them, for us in a way, they don't count. So if you do have a qualitative research paper that you think is suitable for a Lancet journal or any journal, and you're not sure about the word count, talk to the editor before submission and say, you know, we're going to include 2,000 words of quotes. Can we add that to the word count? Because that's what we allow up to 2,000, but it doesn't say that anywhere. That's an in-house measure. So this is an example of a good qualitative research that we published a few years ago. And then just want to say a bit about the publishing landscape. So you're probably all aware now that many journals, including the Lancet Group, we operate as families. So this is 15 journals, 18 journals from the Lancet Group. We're now over 25. We are just about to launch one on women's health, obstetrics and gynecology and women's health. And we will be launching Lancet Primary Care this year as well. That will go live very soon. And we're going to have Regional Health Africa this year. So the family is still growing. And what we try to do is to find the best home for a paper within the journal family. So these journals are different sizes. The Lancet itself is a weekly, so they publish 3 or 4 research articles a month. Lancet Psychiatry is one of the smaller ones. Sorry, the Lancet publishes 3 or 4 research articles a week. Lancet Psychiatry publishes 4 research articles a month. That's only 48 research articles a year. We are a very small journal. Some of the other journals like Lancet Public Health, Lancet Global Health will publish more papers. So sometimes we think it's a good paper, but we don't have space for it. So we will then think, is it about addiction? Is it about gambling, public health? Can we offer it to public health? That's one of our first, can it go there? Is it about child and adolescent mental health? In which case, perhaps child and adolescent health would be interested. And going forwards, we will have the Women's Health Journal, so we may be going there. So if we think it's a good study, but we don't have room in our small journal, our first option is, do we think it's Lancet quality, and can we find it a home in the family? If not, we can also offer transfer to some psychiatry journals published by Elsevier. So we might say, we don't want it, but we can transfer it to one of these 2 journals for you, or one of these 3 journals. And that saves you having to upload everything again and go through the whole submission process. So we're trying to make life easier for you, and we're trying to keep good papers in the Lancet and in the Elsevier journal families. And this can happen before or after peer review. So I touched briefly on writing a good cover letter. So you should have access to the slides afterwards. This is one where somebody wrote, the Lancet Psychiatry has previously published important studies examining the impact of COVID on adolescent mental health, one example, second example, and you also publish results from this trial. And then we think our study will therefore be of interest. What they've done here is to show that they're familiar with the journal, which puts me in a good mood, and also made it, I now can't say this paper is not within our scope or this topic is not of interest to Lancet Psychiatry, because you've shown very much it is. So show how your research fits within the work of the journal to which you're submitting. And then be very careful if your paper is rejected and you resubmit, because you need to change all the words. And we do quite often get cover letters that mention other journals, which doesn't change our decision, but it's not good. And then show an advance on previous work. So obviously we all want research to build on what's gone before and to take it forwards. But in order to show an advance, we need to know what's already known and what was known at the time when you started your study. So we believe that reports of new research should begin with a systematic review. And this should occur in two places. So it will occur when you're planning your project and applying for funding, and then also when you're writing the manuscript, because it may be 2 or 3 years since the funding was given and life will have moved on and new papers will have been published. So we're not saying you need to publish a systematic review, but we are asking in a specific panel. This is distinct for Lancet journals, but other journals have similar things like key advances, key points or background. So what we're asking for is evidence before this study. And that's the results of a literature search. So we ask you to say which databases you searched, the search terms used, any criteria to include or exclude studies from the ones that came up in your search, start and end dates, language restrictions, and then a brief assessment of the quality of the evidence. So the idea is people can look and go, yes, you search the literature, no one else has done this, or there's 2 or 3 studies on this, but you're saying they have certain weaknesses or they're constrained in some way, and our study is filling a gap, taking this forwards. And then we ask you to describe the added value of this study. And this is how your findings add value to the existing evidence. So it's not a repeat of your methods. It's not even the findings as in the abstract. We don't have many numbers in this, but we want to go, what's new? What are the exciting bits of your paper that you're pulling out into this section to highlight for clinicians to read? And then we ask for a final section, implications of all the available evidence, where you say, knowing what we've shown here, knowing what's in the literature, this is what we think the clinical implications should be for either clinical practice or for policy. So I touched briefly earlier on negative studies. These are important and they should be part of the record. And this has actually just been recognized in the revised Declaration of Helsinki that came out late last year. What journals need to do, and authors, is to distinguish between a study that shows definitively that an intervention does not work or is no better than a comparator, and failed studies that cannot reach a conclusion because of methodological flaws or too small a sample. Okay? So sometimes so ideally, if your study is negative, we want it to be a definitive negative where you're saying this does not work and we should move on and investigate something else. But if there are caveats, if for some reason there were problems in the study, it may be you should still publish the negative findings, but you can publish them as pilot studies, as exploratory findings, and tag them. So you're saying this didn't work, but it might work in other circumstances. There were weaknesses in my study for various reasons, but we still think our findings should be published and shared with people, and they can help to build on them. And in all these studies, we ask you to provide as many data as possible, because there's more and more meta-analyses being done. People are now doing individual participant data meta-analyses, network meta-analyses, and they're going back and extracting the data from papers and using those in meta-analyses. So the more data you give, the stronger the metas can be. So then tell the full story. And this is rooted in clinical trials, where many years ago, trials were poorly reported. They still are poorly reported. It's not just from industry, hiding allegedly negative findings. Academics are also very bad at publishing all their research, various reasons, you will know them. So what's happened in the research and publishing fields is a really strong move towards publishing protocols so that we know what you intended to do at the start when you got your funding. So the protocol describes the aims, interventions, outcomes, statistical procedures, ethical considerations, and plan use and dissemination of data before the start of a study. And they help safeguard against unethical changes in methods and reporting of a study, and are important tools for research quality control, integrity, and transparency. And the idea is, if your primary outcome was the effect at 6 months, that is what you report as your primary outcome. If it didn't work at 6 months, it's a negative finding. Even if it worked at 3 months or at 12 months, those are your secondary outcomes. So we're trying to prevent people cherry picking their results. And it's important that protocols are available for readers, editors, and peer reviewers to check. And peer reviewers are very strong on this now. So we require that protocols are submitted with the manuscript for trials and for observational studies. As I said, peer reviewers increasingly expect the protocols to be included with the paper and will ask for it if it's not there. And then once after publication, all accepted articles should include a link to the full study protocol published on the author's institutional website. Many protocols are now published in journals such as Trials or BMC Psychiatry or something similar. That is not a replacement for the full protocol. And so we actually want the full original protocol. If you don't have the protocol because you're not a clinical trial and you haven't done that, we ask for a statistical analysis plan. And again, there's guidance on this published in JAMA several years ago, and you can register your statistical analysis plan in various places. So then what's really important in mental health research, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, is that the choice of outcome measure can really influence your findings. We're using subjective scales. We're asking people about their feelings and their behaviors. It's not blood pressure. So which measure you choose can have an effect on what you're describing and your results. So what we're asking now in Lancet Psychiatry is a dedicated section within the methods explaining your choice of outcome measure. So we're asking why the primary outcome measure was chosen, how widely used it is. So you might say, oh, we're using HAM-D, everybody uses HAM-D, it's used globally. Or you might, how accessible it is. So we're trying to encourage replication, and that the research is robust and people can go in and reproduce it in their own populations. So we prefer outcome measures that are freely available. You don't need to pay, you don't need to apply for permission. It's not a condition of us publishing the paper, but it will affect how useful that paper is to the population. So we're just asking you to say that. Has it been translated into other languages? And then we ask for an explanation of the clinical meaning of changes in the points measured using the score. So if you may have a group that moves from 5 to 10 on a mean score, and another group move from 15 to 20. Are those the same thing? Where are the cutoffs? What are the clinical implications of a 5-point improvement in this score? And is a 5-point improvement in a low score the same as a 5-point improvement in a high score? Is it linear? And then why this measure? Why not a different one? And because peer reviewers will often say, oh, why did you use this? Why didn't you use something else? People have their favorite measures. We're just asking you to explain why you chose the one you did. So then, as authors, I strongly urge you to look up the reporting guidelines. If we were live, I'd ask you which of these you're familiar with. So CONSORT is for randomized clinical trials. STROBE is for observational studies in epidemiology. There's PRISMA, which you will see cited in all systematic reviews and meta-analyses. There's CORE-Q for qualitative research. There are many, many others. And they're all assembled on the Equator Network site. There's several hundred there. They do have an algorithm for helping you find the right one. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of what the CONSORT does. Basically, if you're worried about staring at a blank screen and you don't know how to start writing your paper, this is for the juniors amongst you, CONSORT really, really helps you write your paper. Because this is CONSORT requirements for abstracts. What the important point here is one sentence on the background of the study. Everything else on this slide is about methodology. Now, some of it's trial specific, like the trial registration number, but otherwise we need to know who your study population was, what they look like, what you did, who did it, how it was assessed. So methods, methods, methods. And then findings. So for clinical trials, primary data only, mainly in the abstract. If you do put secondary outcomes in the abstract for any type of study, we want all the key clinical outcomes, secondary outcomes. So again, not cherry picking, not just putting, oh, this one matched our hypothesis, so we'll put this in the abstract, but the other one didn't match our hypothesis, so we'll forget it. Okay, we want the abstract, which is the most widely shared piece of information about your paper, needs to contain all the key information. If it is a clinical trial, then adverse events get reported, and then your interpretation. So that's for abstracts, and then CONSORT, again, will guide you through all the steps of the paper. There is a problem in terms of these CONSORT requirements for abstracts, is that many journals have strict word limits for abstracts. It's very difficult to follow CONSORT and to meet your journal's requirements. CONSORT takes precedence, and Lancet journals do actually now have we have an exception for trials, but it should be an exception for any studies. So I would always go with CONSORT and say to the editor, I'm reporting all my outcomes in the abstract as per guidance. What do you want me to do? And then Lancet journals now have additional requirements for abstracts. So in the abstract, we ask you for the numbers of each sex or gender, whatever data you collected. We're asking for the mean and age range of your sample. We're asking for ethnicity data or a statement that ethnicity data were not available. And we're asking whether or not people with lived experience of the disorder or the condition under question were involved in any part of the study or writing. And this is for all studies. So this is the CONSORT trial profile. if you've read trial papers, you'll see it, but it's a really easy way of describing how people flow through your study. So how many you screened, how many were recruited, and how many left the study at different points, and then how many were included in the analyses. So again, doesn't have to be a clinical trial. This is useful for helping you just explain how people flowed through your study. Much easier than writing in text. And then key tables. The first table we need in a clinical paper is demographics. Who are your participants? Sex, gender, age range, socioeconomic indicators, other comorbidities, whatever you felt was important to measure, the reader needs to know. And they need that in their heads before they can go any further. So table 1, demographics. Then we have primary outcomes, secondary outcomes. Then you may have more detailed analyses. And again, if it is a trial, you have a table of adverse events. I touched on sex and gender reporting, and Chantal mentioned that I was chair of the EA's Gender Policy Committee. So that committee was responsible several years ago for the publication of the SAGER guidelines, which are sex and gender equity in research. And they were to ensure the correct use of the term sex and gender. So sex is biological, gender is a social construct. We don't mind which you measured, but whichever you measured or whichever data you took from a database, we need to know which one you're talking about and what you're describing. And now those guidelines were published in 2016. They don't really touch on gender diversity, but many more people, studies now are offering other terms. So you might ask your participants, do you identify as male, female, or man, woman, other, prefer not to say? Whatever data you collect, again, we want you to report those data. And then we do ask that you discuss the influence or association of variables on your findings where appropriate. If your study is too small, you can't do this. But if you've got a big study, we'll ask for a sex-specific or gender-specific analysis. And all the Elsevier health journals are now signed up to SAGER, and many, many other journals globally. WHO follow this, NIH, this is common practice, so you should be doing this. And then I mentioned lived experience, contributions to research. Lancet Psychiatry really believes in this. All our cover artists are people who are living with a mental illness. We have one cover artist each year, and I've got some pictures here. So we believe that people with lived experience of mental illness are stakeholders with equally valuable insights into mental health research as academics, and they have their own unique insights. We may call them service users, experts by experience, people with lived experience, patients. And many of these will be academics, some will be clinicians, and some will be lay people who are not actively involved in research, but may now be coming into being involved in research. So I mentioned the Declaration of Helsinki update from October. This replaced subjects with participants. So again, recognizing the rights, agency, and importance of those individuals as partners in the research enterprise. And then item 6 talks about meaningful engagement with potential and enrolled participants and their communities should occur before, during, and following medical research. And researchers should enable potential and enrolled participants and their communities to share their priorities and values, to participate in research design, implementation, and other relevant activities, and to engage in understanding and disseminating results. Most of our countries that we're all working in will have signed up to the Declaration of Helsinki, and most of the countries in which the journals to which you're submitting have published. So this actually now is a global requirement, really. We look at stages of involvement in research. So the least is after completion of the study, when you just ask someone to comment on what you've done. before, during, or after writing of the paper. So the person with lived experience is asked to read and comment within a paper or separately. They may add a few lines, they may or they might write several paragraphs, but this is all after completion of the study. So they're technically not authors because they weren't involved in the study itself. Then you can have during a study, so they would be eligible to be co-authors or consultants. Then we have co-production, where these people are engaged before a study starts and they help you do the study all the way through. And then before even the beginning, co-design. And co-design is sort of the gold standard. That's where we'd like these people to be involved. But it's not always practical. So you'll know how much you're doing this in your own research, but we are encouraging you to report this. So what we ask for now at Lancet Psychiatry, and some of the other Lancet journals are doing this, not just in mental health either, so rheumatology are doing this. In the abstract, briefly state whether or not people with lived experience were involved in the research and writing. So that's a straightforward positive, or they were or they were not. And then in the main methods section, if people were involved, we're saying were they involved in shaping the research question and study design, choosing outcome measures, planning recruitment, working as lived experience researchers, assessing the burden of interventions, writing up the study, or disseminating the findings. And if your lived experience co-authors, co-designers were involved in this, we're asking you to report that. And then if no one was involved, then we just ask you to state that as a limitation in the discussion. If people were involved, it's up to you and them how much is declared. So people can say so-and-so with initials has experience of a particular disorder, but you don't have to. So this is entirely up to you and how much your participants want and your co-authors want to declare. So just very briefly, what happens after submission. So at Lancet Journals, we're a full-time editorial team. So we work very quickly. So you should get an editorial assessment within 1 or 2 days of submission. That would be by someone like me, the editor-in-chief, and then possibly by someone else on the team as well. If 2 of us like it, then we will decide to send the paper for clinical and statistical peer review. So we have a dedicated panel of statistical reviewers, and for each research article, there will be one person looking specifically at the statistics. There we go. So these are statisticians who work in mental health in some way. So they should be vaguely familiar with the research. It might not be their own area. We do pay them because this is not necessarily their area of research. Quite often they're researching statistical methods and how to improve things. So we ask them to review within 3 to 5 working days. And if any changes are made to the statistics, they re-review. And then for clinical peer review, we need at least 2 positive, constructive clinical reviews. So in a way, our favorites are major. People might say minor, oh, this is lovely, you don't need to do very much. We don't find that terribly helpful. We'd actually rather have someone who's going, well, it's a nice paper, but you could do this, 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 and this to strengthen it. And if appropriate, if it's a country-specific paper, we need a reviewer from that country. And then we quite often invite lived experience peer review. So one reviewer who has experience of mental illness and preferably the disorder under study, but our network isn't that great. We don't necessarily cover that. And then finally, I've talked a lot about research articles. We do publish other things. So we publish correspondence and comments. We publish personal views, health policies. Those go in our green section with reviews. They're big substantive pieces. So we're looking at 3,000 to 4,000 words on personal views and health policy pieces. And then we have first-person account. So we have a letter from, mainly for people working in low and middle income countries or settings that we don't usually hear from in mainstream research. And we have insight essays, which are written by people living with a mental illness, and it's about how that illness affects them and the insight they've obtained from it. So that's it. Thank you very much. So let's see if there's any questions.
Hello. So I think I see only one question, so that will be easy to, to answer. I think it was just so clear or so interesting that maybe the question haven't popped up yet. So the question is if the participants can get the presentation for future use.
Yes, so what I tried to send it before, but I sent it as a PowerPoint and it was too big. What I'll do is I'll save it as a PDF and try and send it to you, Chantal, in that format.
Okay, and you're okay, it's okay with you if you share.
Yeah, then you can share with everyone and share the recording as well. So the recording's there, but I know it's often quicker just to flick through the slides. Yeah.
Okay, so if there is no more question, maybe I have a couple of questions for you, hopefully of interest for everybody. One question is about the sample size, because in psychiatry, for instance, we do have a lot of difficulties sometimes to recruit big samples or vaccine with withdrawal. So at the end, you have a very small sample. Is that of interest for you, or is there like a line that is below?
No, because so the sample size is going to be determined by your expected effect size and by how much dropout you're expecting, and possibly even by how much variation there is within the population, although that sort of comes under effect size. So that's why we want the statistical analysis plan, because in the statistical analysis plan, you should say, I am expecting an effect size of 0.3, and to show that with a probability, I need this many people. Okay, so it's going to depend. So we won't say, oh, there's only 20 people, or there's 2,000 people, because there will be studies with 2,000 people that don't answer the question correctly. and it may be that, the qualitative research, some of that is quite small numbers, but that is qualitative research. But we probably don't want anything on people at about 5, because you're really getting into generalizability. But I wouldn't, we don't have absolute cutoffs of this is a good number and this is not. But we do appreciate that it's very hard to keep people in studies of mental illness.
Okay, so now in the meantime, we do have some other questions. So our attendees are warming up. So hey, Lisbeth. So Lisbeth is asking if you said that the Lancet wants a full story. What if we have a clinical trial, but getting the healthcare expenditure data from registers will take considerable time, like 2 years? Will you still consider it?
Yeah. So that's why I put the economic analysis is quite often a separate paper. And we've been looking at this more over the past year. So we've been talking to some health economists who've encouraged us to consider their papers more. So there was one paper where we did push the authors, strongly encouraged the authors to include the health economic data in the main study, because we knew they had them, and they were actually saying in their discussion that the economic benefit was one of their key findings. So we said, well, but then they said, but that's in a separate paper. And we said, no. If it's a key finding, we need it in here. But then other times we know that those data come later. So we've published the trial, and then we'll publish the economic analysis. Now that does mean we're giving 2 papers to one study. So in some ways it's actually easier if there's a long gap. But we did publish one where we published the clinical data, and then the economic data came within 2 or 3 months, I think. And the other thing, that's also something where we can share among the Lancet journals. So we're looking at a paper at the moment where the Lancet published the main trial, and I'm hoping that we're going to publish the economic analysis. So again, it may be that we publish the main trial and we ask someone like Lancet Europe to take the economic analysis, because I really started to worry a couple of years ago. Like some of these interventions are wonderful, but if we can't afford to deliver them,
That's okay.
it's something to consider.
That's a very good point, and thank you for asking, Lisbeth. We have another question. How important would you say is that the writing is understandable to a broad audience, so not overly technical?
That's a really good point. Some of that will come back to the journal in which you're publishing. So if you're publishing for a specialist audience, then you can be quite technical. If you're aiming for a general medical journal like the Lancet, or a general psychiatry journal like Lancet Psychiatry, you need to be less technical and more clear. And there will be a difference. So a paper that's, the Lancet is read by, we hope it's read by general clinicians, and that some clinicians who are not working in mental health will read the mental health papers. Lancet Psychiatry, we assume you're all working in mental health, and we do things. So within that, I'm not looking for an introduction that justifies why you need to do research on depression. Lancet Psychiatry, we take it as a given. Depression, it's a burden, it's an economic burden, it's a societal burden, it's an individual burden. Don't tell me all that. You haven't got many words, so move straight on. But in the Lancet, you would need to do that, because in the Lancet, you're justifying why the general reader needs to do that. So that's slightly different from the question you're asking. In terms of technical language, I would say be as clear as you can. So sometimes you need a technical term, and the technical term is the one that will say what you're trying to say, and plain English doesn't do it. So then you've got to use the technical term. You may be able to say, I can explain this more in the appendix. There are ways to go to that. But also, keep the English as clear as possible. And for that, use short sentences. So, and don't be afraid of repeating. If you look at Lancet papers, we have a really good in-house copy editing team, and they do a lot of work on papers. But what we do too is we hate it and this, because we're not, sometimes it's obvious, it was the subject of the last sentence, but quite often when authors write it, they'll write 3 sentences with 3 different subjects and then go, this is something. And you're like, sorry, which one are you on? So we repeat. So we go, this intervention, or the EACLIPT protocol, or, we actually will repeat more, because it just helps the reader to follow through, even though it looks repetitious. And so that probably half answers your question.
Okay, I have another question from Claudie. And she asked if you could share some dates of
Cloudy.
hard for you to consider a paper. So where you had the impression this is of no interest because of whatever.
Okay. So my my least favorite, the papers we're rejecting a lot at the moment are GBD papers, GBD and UK Biobank papers. So we love GBD, we love UK Biobank, we love freely available data, and authors being able to go in and mine those data sets and do new analyses. But what you've got to do is add value. So what's happening with the GBD papers is you can go on the GBD exchange and you can download depression in different countries, depression by age range, depression by sex and gender. It doesn't need to be put in a manuscript. So we're getting lots and lots of papers going, oh, this is GBD on anxiety or on depression or on psychosis, and go, yeah, all you've done is download the statistics and you haven't even really added much. So the papers that we publish, which are coming from the GBD collaborative groups, are trying to say either no one's ever published on this disorder, so it's actually sort of the first global summary, or new methodology. And you know, we just published one, and I'm going to get the disorder wrong, but it was that they've changed how they're collecting the data. They've gone from passive to active counting or something. So the numbers have changed. So that's sort of worthy of a paper, because if you download the GBD statistics for 2021, they'll look very different from 1990. And it's not because the disorder's changed or the prevalence has changed. It's because how it's being recorded has changed. So those aren't really big mistakes, but they're the types of paper that we think are not adding value to what's around. And there's a lot of papers that just ask a dull question, or they will spend hours and thousands of data points showing you that diabetes is associated with depression. Yeah, I know that. So we're sort of looking for more, and that's where that evidence before this study comes in useful, because if you write that bit and you go, oh yeah, diabetes associated with depression, then you haven't added anything. I don't think I've got any silly mistakes. I sort of know what you're driving at. I think at Lancet we don't get many of those. Actually, people are pretty good at, for the research articles and the substantive papers, the standard we get is good.
Okay. And do you invite comments, research?
Yep. So for each research article we publish, or nearly all of them now, we invite a comment. So for every research article that's published online, you will see there is a comment on it. And that's usually by one of the peer reviewers. Partly because they've already done the work and they're familiar with the paper, and then we're in quite a hurry because we invite them when we accept the paper. So it's, you've got 4 weeks, please, can you write this comment and get it to me, and we'll get it copy edited. But also it's a reward. You know, you've done the work of reviewing this paper for Lancet Psychiatry. We thought you raised some interesting points, and would you like to discuss? Because quite often peer reviewers will suggest topics for the discussion. So can the authors discuss and speculate and do all these things? We go, no, they can't, because they don't have room. Our discussions are very short. So again, the comment is then the reviewer saying, well, it would be nice to explore this aspect or that aspect, and just try to shine a different light, look at it from a different angle. We don't invite a lot of other types of paper because we really get enough. But it may be I would be at a conference and I would hear somebody talking about something and I go, oh, it would, be really nice to have a review on that. But quite often those people have already published a review, and that's why they're giving the talk. And they go, yes, I published it in JAMA Psych last journal. So, and then the big projects we do, like commissions and series, we really work collaboratively on those. So people will come to me with an idea and we'll discuss the idea and we'll go backwards and forwards. And by the time I say, okay, we are going to do a Lancet Psychiatry commission on this, or we're doing a series on ADHD, which will be 2 or 3 big reviews, we've had quite a lot of input into the structure. Yeah.
Okay. I don't see any new questions. And that is actually also good news, because we can finish on time, sharp at 6. So many thanks everybody for your interest, for the people who have attended and the one who will hear this webinar later when it will be online. So we will also, of course, make a lot of publicity around this. And many thanks, Joan, for being here and sharing your insights and giving all these very important pieces of advice. And I think everybody can learn something. This is really good. And yeah, I think I will also use it for my early career researcher, because I think this is good for everybody. So many thanks to everybody and for your time, and have a very nice evening, and see you hopefully soon.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you, everybody.
everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't meet you all in person, but come and find me at a conference one day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.